Welcome back to the Results Operations Centre here in Midrand. I'm joined by political analyst Dr. Dale McKinley. Very good afternoon, Doc. Thank you so much for having us. So, of course, yesterday and today we've seen our local markets being absolutely smashed. The bond markets, stock markets, and the rand not doing too well either. So, of course, I think this is because the election outcomes are not yet clear. We're over the 60% mark in terms of the number of votes that have been counted, but we're still a ways away. And of course, just off camera, you were indicating that we've still got the big metro numbers to come in, so things could shift. So of course, there's an anticipation that the ANC is not going to get that majority and it's going to have to partner with someone. Who do you reckon that they'll partner with?
Well, the first thing is it depends on what that percentage is. If it inches up to, let's say, the mid-40s, then the coalition situation changes a bit, because they would only need maybe 5 or 6%. If it stays where it is at about 42, 43, then they're going to have to rethink that. I think in the first case scenario, let's say they stay where they are, I think they're going to have to consider, as much as people would sort of say, ooh, they're going to have to consider the two progeny, which is the EFF and the MK. They come out of the ANC. As much as there might be differences and fights, I think that would be the consideration, because I don't think that a super pact with the DA or the multi-party coalition would be politically palatable to a lot of people within the ANC. So my sense is that if they were to get to 45, 46, then they could think of an IFP and a few smaller parties. That might make it possible. But that's a bit, right now it doesn't look like that's going to happen.
Yeah, and on top of that, the ANC and the DA not exactly on the same page.
No, they're not. I think that there's a question, you know, the DA is, I think, inching towards a bit more of an open stance towards the ANC, but I think it would not go down well with large portions of the ANC's constituency to try to make pacts with the DA. So I don't think that's politically possible at the moment, but the other options are not any less difficult, let's put it that way.
Yeah. Whoever forms a government, whichever party or parties become the government, they have to represent all South Africans, not just the people that voted for them. Do you see society coming round and embracing any new government that we're going to have, or do you see further social fragmentation, given that, of course, we do have quite a polarized society in South Africa in terms of how we think and what our political leanings are? I
think, like it happens with most elections, there'll be a honeymoon period. There'll be a sense of people waiting to see. So if it's an ANC, EFF coalition, there'll be people that will say, ooh, from the beginning, this is not going to work. There's others who are going to say, well, let's wait and see. So I think there'll be a period of sort of relative calm to see where things go. But I think inevitably, we are a society that is riven with very, very deep cleavages and conflicts. And I don't think that's going to go away, irrespective of what coalition we have. So I don't expect, I hope, and I think most South Africans would hope, that we won't start tearing ourselves apart over this. And I don't think that's going to happen. But I do see more, and in some ways it might be a relatively positive thing, is more ideological sort of and political debates happening. For so long we've been so expectant of the ANC is going to control everything, and now because of the uncertainty, that does open up new democratic possibilities within civil society, to have the kinds of debates, as opposed to throwing words at each other and engaging in violent conflict. Yeah.
Not that long ago, the MK surged through the 1 million votes mark. It's certainly surprised many, maybe not surprised in KZN, but surprised in places like Mpumalanga. But you're not convinced necessarily that they are going to end up as number 3. Tell us more.
The reason why I'm not convinced, although I think it's going to be a toss-up, is because the major metros have not come in yet. And I think in those cases, and particularly in Gauteng, the EFF has an advantage. Now, the EFF is at the moment, what, 150,000 or so, less than 150,000 votes behind MK. So it's a bit to catch up, but it's possible. So what I'm saying is, don't write off the EFF just yet as the third largest. I think it's going to be a neck and neck race for that position.
Absolutely. And then just lastly, Dr. Dale, what do you think? What lessons can we learn from this election?
Well, I think a lot of people have talked about some lessons around planning better, you know, giving more time. I point to the idea of why don't we think of 2 days for elections and allow ourselves the time so we don't face these kinds of problems. So I think that's maybe a lesson to be learned from this. The other thing is that we are entering into a very uncertain and new period. In some people it excites them, other people are foreboding and fearful of what happens. In some ways I think that's good for our democracy. I think uncertainty and and competition is good, and also that the elections are telling us, because of the massive amounts of people that actually didn't vote, we're looking maybe at 60%, so that 40% out there has to be spoken to. People cannot feel left out, otherwise that is going to contribute to the very things you were talking about in conflict and tearing. So we have to, elections are not the be all and end all, they're the starting point of democratic inclusivity.
Yeah, we do have a little bit of time, 2 minutes it seems. What do you think the future is of President Cyril Ramaphosa?
I think for now, I don't see any other alternative for the ANC at the moment. I mean, if you looked at the polls prior to the elections, he was still fairly popular, and in terms of, at least from the leadership perspective, and I think he's consolidated that within the ANC.
Yes.
So for right now, there's going to be criticism, but his biggest enemies, the RET, are now in Parliament themselves, as in the form of MK.
But the problem is that if the ANC has to marry either the EFF or the MK, they might have some reservations about him being the president.
That's true. And so I think there's going to be contestation. Let's be honest. The ANC is riven with different factions. And it's not just because the elections have happened doesn't mean that's going to stop. So we're going to continue to see conflictual and competing interests within the ANC. The question is, going right back to the first, is it MK? Is it EFF? And depending upon that choice will depend upon how what happens in terms of the internal ANC relations.